Welcome the chosen ones. They couldn't eliminate your talent, so they attempted to murder your name. You may not realize it, but the most deadly kind of combat does not use guns. It involves whispering, and the most brutal assaults are not carried out in broad daylight. They happen in discussions when you are not invited. Smear campaigns are spiritual assassinations that masquerade as care. And if you are the chosen one, the assaults do not begin until you do anything wrong. They start when you accomplish something correctly. Let us stop for a fact. According to psychological research, lies circulate 6 times quicker than the truth, particularly when the truth is inconvenient and the lie is delightfully outrageous. So picture being someone whose mere being reveals gloom. Imagine how quickly they will act to shut you down. This isn't simply gossip. This is not petty jealousy. This is a full-fledged, orchestrated takedown that occurs gradually, openly, and sometimes even pleasantly. But, spoiler warning, it doesn't end well for them since they didn't expect this. You were created with something they cannot create or erase, divine receipts. Now, before we go into the spiritual DNA of why this slander effort was so wicked and why the end result will be horrific, not for you, but for them. If pettiness were a career, some of your opponents would already have PhDs and LinkedIn recommendations. But don't worry, this won't be simply a message. It is going to be a mirror, and by the end, you'll realize why being misunderstood was the universe's way of safeguarding something they were never meant to see. Let's go deeper. Number 1, they created a villain because they couldn't face a mirror. They created a villain because they couldn't face a mirror. That's what really occurred. You did not injure them. You did not betray them. You did not even compete with them. What you did was come out as completely clear, talented, and unbothered. And that alone was enough to start the storm. See, most people are content as long as you question yourself. They are able to endure you, so long as you shrink, question, second guess, and play small. But when you start standing in your truth and stop acting humble to make others feel tall, they worry. Not because you've changed, but because your confidence embodies everything they've been fleeing from. You become the mirror they didn't ask for. You did not talk arrogantly, but your presence highlighted their uneasiness. You did not assault, yet your radiance disrupted their gloom. You did not declare war, yet your peace sounded louder than theirs. They couldn't handle it. Instead than performing the hard internal work, ask yourself, why does this person's light make me uncomfortable? They chose the simpler road. They transformed you into a menace, monster, manipulator, and liar. Because telling that tale was safer than acknowledging that they had never been honest with themselves. So they changed your identity, distorted your motivations, and repackaged your benevolence as control. Your strength was ego, not because it was genuine, but because it gave them something to hide behind. They needed people to stare at you through the fog they had generated so that no one could see their own shadow. The worst aspect was that many of them had no idea they were doing it. Some were so hurt, so firmly ingrained in self-denial, that being a villain seemed like a way to survive. But do you know what is wild? Even after all the falsehoods, nasty words, chilly looks, and quiet treatment, you remain here, standing and gleaming because a mirror may be shattered. However, it never forgets its reflection. Even when buried behind falsehoods, the truth has a way of coming to the surface with time. They did not survive the mirror. But you didn't just endure the smear. You disclosed everything they were attempting to conceal without ever raising a finger. Number 2, they did not want you to be quiet. They intended to obliterate you. They did not want you to be quiet. They intended to obliterate you. That's the thing that folks overlook. This was not about a quarrel or a falling out. This was not about how we grew apart, or they just changed. No, this was done strategically. This was a mission. You were never meant to go this far. And once you did, the aim was apparent. Wipe you out in all ways that count. Quiet your voice, distort your name, destroy your influence, and bury your identity behind falsehoods so deep that even you begin to wonder who you are. It was never just about silencing you. It was about ensuring there was nothing left of you to hear. They tried to undermine your credibility so that no one would believe you. They planned to smear your reputation so thoroughly that even the truth would seem questionable. They were dissatisfied with your move back. They wanted you discredited, isolated, and disassembled because your existence was too disruptive. Your talent, energy, and clarity. It did not merely glow. It exposed. It revealed their deception, false feeling of power, and the little empire they constructed on half-truths. People like that don't just want you gone. They want you to be invisible. This was not a casual interaction. It was purposeful. They fed people tales about you in dosages, little digs, and dubious statements. They're all intended to gradually erode your image in the eyes of others. And what makes matters worse, they did it with a serene expression, a smile, as if they cared or were just worried. But behind it lay bitterness disguised as prudence, envy, and a facade of morality. They realized your quiet was not a sign of weakness, but of strength. So they sought to agitate you, get you to snap, and respond in a manner that could be weaponized. And when you refused to accept the bait, they lied even louder. Because if they couldn't persuade you to damage yourself, they'd destroy the version of you that others saw. However, they were unaware of this. Humans cannot remove what has been divinely allocated. They attempted to erase you, but merely removed their access to your grace. And now they'll have to deal with the echo of the voice they attempted to quiet. Number 3, the slur was not only rumor. It was psychological war. The slander wasn't only talk. It was psychological war. It was premeditated, purposeful, and designed to break you from the inside out. This wasn't some little rumor that blew out of control. No, it was created with accuracy. They understood just which tales to weave, which elements of your story to alter, and who to sow the seeds with. The purpose was not only to make people mistrust you. The purpose was to make you doubt yourself, to question your own memories, motivations, and goodness. That's what makes it so hazardous. This was a mental game, not a misunderstanding. They did not yell their falsehoods. They whispered them. This is how smear campaigns operate. They don't approach you with direct hostility, and they move discreetly in corners, in informal talks, or merely between phone calls. They don't want the truth. They demand control. And having power does not come from proving yourself incorrect. It stems from making people doubtful about you, your character, or what really occurred. This is how psychological warfare is carried out, not with fists, but with uncertainty. The saddest aspect is that some of those who listened were not malevolent. They were just easily persuaded and misled by the performance because, indeed, the ones operating the smear campaign were acting professional, calm, and even sobbing, although phony tears, playing victim to your alleged harshness. But that was all part of the plan. Confuse the narrative, so that people stop seeking for the truth completely. This was never just about turning people against you. It was about turning you against yourself, making you feel alienated, suspicious, and carrying the burden of a falsehood until you began walking as if it were real. They understood that if they couldn't kill your talent, they might attempt to destabilize your psyche. But what they didn't depend on was your clarity, your inner knowing, the quiet part of you that refused to let their cacophony define you. Yes, it was wartime. Yes, it stung. But you did not collapse. And that is what worries them today. You were intended to fall apart. Instead, you found it out. You recovered. You remembered who you were. And now their whole scheme is crumbling under the weight of reality. They couldn't kill. Number 4, they did not only assault your name. They tried to infect it. They didn't just assault your name. They tried to infect it. There is a distinction between speaking negatively about someone and purposefully polluting how others see them. They didn't merely drag your character. It was about transforming your identity into something terrible. They didn't just want people to despise you. They wanted others to be afraid of being linked to you, to question your value, your heart, and your narrative, to perceive you as a walking red sign made out of falsehoods disguised as truths. This was not a random act of hatred. This was reputational warfare. They regarded your name as if it were infectious, as if being associated with you would diminish people's credibility or comfort level. So they raised suspicions. They used terms like "be careful" and "just watch," never openly accusing you, but constantly hinting danger since suggestion is stronger than slander. A flat-out untruth may be disregarded, but a well-placed doubt stays and spreads. And that's exactly what they wanted. Your name to be welcomed with raised eyebrows and side glances rather than trust and respect. It seemed subtle at first, then it got constant. They said things so often that individuals began to repeat them as well, even if they were unaware of the complete tale. This is how infection works. Not everyone who shares it is aware that they are promoting something harmful. Some believed they were defending themselves. Others just wanted to be on the safe side. Your name soon began to appear in rooms. Before you did, you wore clothing you never chose and spoke in a language you never authorized. They couldn't just cancel you, so they sought to make your name hazardous, making it something people avoided, questioned, or muttered about behind closed doors. In doing so, they want to deprive you of your own authority. They understood something. When your name has weight, so does your influence. So they attempted to make your name hefty in the wrong manner, not with honor, but with terror. However, they failed to comprehend the following. When your name is anchored in truth, it cannot remain tainted. The taint may remain, but truth is the ultimate immune system. And now, slowly but steadily, the virus is dispersing and everyone is realizing your name does not contain poison. It conveyed prophesy. Number 5. They used your strength as a threat since it was not theirs. They used your strength as a threat since it was not theirs. Not because you were mistaken, not because you harmed anybody, but because your presence made them feel helpless. You did not perform the part they gave to you. You didn't remain in the cage they'd made around their anxieties. And this made them uneasy. You did not bow when they anticipated surrender. You did not pursue validation when they refused permission. And that's when they realized your strength wasn't impressive. It was risky. You walked with self-trust. You spoke clearly. You didn't need applause to realize you were correct. You did not collapse when they silenced you. That was what they couldn't bear. They expected you to flinch. They expected you to obtain permission. But when you moved decisively without their approval, they had to explain it away. Not the truth, but a perversion. So they began depicting your strength as pride. They referred to your independence as a rebellion. They labeled your artwork bogus. They said your concentration was obsession because your clarity revealed their uncertainty and your self-control reminded them of how little they had. They couldn't see that your borders were not an act of war. These were acts of healing. You did not cut them off out of hatred. You chose distance to save your sanity. Instead of accepting their part, they played the victim. You had changed, they remarked. But what they really meant was that you no longer needed me to define you. And in their perspective, it is treachery. They wanted you to keep shrinking, explaining yourself, and accommodating their discomfort. But you stopped. You stood tall, and they took it personally. Because, in their view, you were not intended to ascend. Especially not without their assistance, consent, or plan. But, really, your strength was never a danger. It was a mirror. People who have not established their own cannot abide being around someone who does. So they turned your strength into poison. Not because you were dangerous, but because they were too insecure to mature. And now they sit on the sidelines, attempting to dominate the narrative. But your life continues to prove the truth. They cannot be silent. You were never arrogant. You were just unshakable. A whole. Number 6. This was not personal to them. It was a ritual. This was not personal to them. It was a ritual. That's what makes it so unsettling. You were not the exception. You were merely next in line. These folks follow a pattern, a playbook, a cycle. They repeat themselves whenever someone enters with too much light, truth, or presence. They identify someone talented, unique, and clear, and they circle like vultures. Not because they did anything wrong, but because they dared to be real without apologizing. And it poses a challenge to those who base their identities on performance. You were never the only one they targeted. You were the one they couldn't completely contain. That's why it became so violent. Others, under pressure, played small and begged to be let back into their sick little group. But you didn't. You stood tall, bewildered but unbreakable. And that's how they were exposed. That's why it seemed like overkill. It wasn't just that they didn't like you. They needed to publicly demolish you in order to set an example and warn others. What happens when a person refuses to conform to their system? They have done this to others previously. However, not everyone is like you. Not someone whose soul is too loud to be smothered in a call to be authentic or false. You were more than just an annoyance to them. You caused a disturbance in their spiritual environment. Your purity upset their poison. Your failure to gossip amplified their manipulation. Your emotional candor emphasized their games. So the same trend kicked in. Isolate, discredit, distort, exile. It's not personal for them since they're no longer aware of what they're doing. They've normalized it. Knocking down individuals with substance is their way of feeling important. It's a routine that helps them feel in control of the turmoil they refuse to confront in themselves. But this time they erred. They chose someone heavenly, spiritually equipped, and capable of not only surviving, but also exposing the cycle. And now the pattern is breaking. because this time the scapegoat isn't going away peacefully. You are on the rise, and the identical ritual they've been doing for years is now coming undone in plain view. The holy did not perish. It awoke. Number 7. They wanted a public execution disguised as compassion. They wanted a public execution disguised as compassion. That was the whole plan. They didn't arrive angry. They turned up for the concert. Soft voices with inclined heads and anxious tones. I am only saying this because I care. I do not want to start anything. People should be aware, however, that it seemed to be an expression of care. It seemed kind, but it was all sabotage. Dressed appropriately for Sunday. They never mentioned anything explicitly. They suggested that they never directly assaulted. They proposed. And in that space of well-placed suggestions, they crafted a picture of you that was more hurtful than any outright attack. Because what they were actually doing was training others to fear you, question your motivations, and see you as unstable, manipulative, or covertly dangerous, all while appearing to protect everyone else. They wanted it to seem as if they were rescuing the community from you. But what they were actually doing was plotting your downfall without getting their hands dirty. The sword had no blood on it, but there were plenty of fingerprints on the grip. It was practiced and premeditated, and the more you attempted to justify yourself, the guiltier you seemed. That was part of the trap. They started the fire and then stepped to the side, shouting and watching it burn, hoping no one would notice they were carrying the matches. This was not honesty. This wasn't about accountability. This was character assassination concealed by false virtue. The scariest thing, some people bought it because the delivery was seamless, the poison was wrapped in love, and many people would rather accept a falsehood told softly than a truth shouted harshly. You were not merely assaulted. You were framed, and every attempt you made to explain yourself was twisted into further evidence against you. That is how these kind of initiatives operate. They want to ruin you, but they want it to seem as if you did it yourself. That way, they may act innocent while watching you bleed. They didn't expect you to survive the scene. You did not die in their story. You have outlived it. And now the mask of worry that they wore is breaking. And behind it lies jealousy, manipulation, and fear of the authority they worked so hard to eliminate. Number 8. The falsehoods they told about you were projections that they could not own. The falsehoods they spread about you were never true. They were projections, muddled reflections of their own unhealed scars disguised as charges. Every slur, every warped interpretation of the truth, every passive hostile punch was them speaking for themselves without recognizing it. They were not characterizing your character. They were exposing theirs. However, instead of going within and dealing with their baggage, they threw it on you and called it insight. They did not only lie to others. They lied to themselves initially, and those falsehoods had to go someplace. So they chose you. You became the ideal canvas. You have a light presence and clarity. However, rather of honoring it, they defiled it since they were dark, not you. They couldn't bear the contrast. Your artwork mirrored their turmoil. Your genuineness was revealed, as was their faking. Your healing exacerbated their dysfunction, so they had to distort you to feel balanced. Here's the worst part. They began to believe the falsehoods themselves. The brain cannot handle too much contradiction. So, when they witnessed your generosity but couldn't bear it, their mind rewrote the tale to make them feel better. She is not nice. She is manipulative. He is not confident. He is haughty. They are not growing. They are changing for the worse. Lies became their reality because truth made them feel insignificant. But no matter how hard they attempted to repaint you, the truth remained that it was their trash on your image. People ultimately realized the brushstrokes did not reflect your reality, your energy, activities, and heart. None of it was consistent with what was being stated. Because truth has a frequency, and falsehoods do not, no matter how many times they are repeated. That vibration cannot be sustained for very long. They attempted diversion rather than just slander. They needed a scapegoat to keep from gazing in the mirror. So they created a fake version of you and persuaded people to react to that version rather than the real you. But suddenly the illusion is dissolving. The full story is slowly and gradually emerge. People are recognizing that you were not the villain. You were the vessel, and the tale they told never mentioned your blackness. It was about their reluctance to address their own issues. Number 9, they started a fire and then played the victim of the smoke. They started the fire and then pretended to be victims of the smoke. That was how manipulative they were. They stood. The pandemonium sparked stories, whispered falsehoods to the appropriate ears, and then stepped aside as if they had nothing to do with the devastation. They wanted to see you burn, and when the flames reached too high, they shouted out for help, as if they were trapped in something. You began. They were the ones who matched your name, character, and tranquility. They sparked gossip, fueled suspicions, and heightened the tension behind closed doors. However, when the heat increased, they shifted roles. Suddenly, they were the ones severely wounded by your actions. Suddenly, they needed assistance, protection, and affirmation. Not because they were genuine victims, but because they were excellent actors, and the others surrounding them, if not perceptive, were engrossed in the act. They cried wolf, but they were the wolves. And every time you attempted to explain, they turned into an assault on me. That was the trap. The more you defended yourself, the more they utilized it to demonstrate that you were the issue. They sought pity for their wounds without acknowledging they were the ones wielding the blade in the first place. They weaponized their own life, claiming emotional injury. They knew the smoke would spread. That is how fireworks extend their life beyond the point at which they are sparked. They move, grow, and infect. They relied on the turmoil to mask their traces. They thought that the mistake would be so obvious that no one would bother inquiring. Wait, who began this? But truth does not perish in a fire. It lingers, simmers, and smells. When individuals trace the smoke back, they discover it did not originate from the person they were supposed to dread. It came from the same people claiming to be innocent. The air is now clearing, and this is becoming painfully clear. They were not the victims. They were the architects. And the same cloud that they believed would protect them is beginning to suffocate their credibility because truth moves slowly but always finds its way home. Number 10. The more they lied, the more the cosmos recorded. The more they lied, the more the cosmos recorded. While they were busy attempting to bury you with false tales, they had no idea they were penning their own demise in indelible ink. Every allegation, slander, and distorted version of your reality wasn't a rumor. It was a receipt, a spiritual paper trail, a record maintained not by you, but by something much more exact and persistent. They believed they were erasing your legacy, but they were instead imprinting their own treachery on something cosmic and untraceable. They felt that if they shouted it loudly, often, and with enough false conviction, it would become the truth. However, truth does not fade with repetition. It merely waits. It waits for the cacophony to subside. It waits for time to pass. When it eventually reappears, it does so with clarity that slices through every falsehood like a knife. That's what they weren't expecting. They were so concentrated on managing the situation that they overlooked the reality. When they lie about your name, they play the long game. The cosmos did not just sit back and let it happen. It took notes. Every effort to portray you as unstable, selfish, or nasty. All of it was recorded. Human memory fades, but spiritual knowledge endures. They were authoring your vindication without even knowing it. And, most ironically, the falsehoods they uttered were intended to harm your future. However, those same falsehoods are now serving as evidence, displaying their habits, jealousy, and fear of what you possess. The more they lied, the clearer it became who they really were. Because falsehoods are short-legged, they can run for a time, but then they collapse under their own weight. Now, the reckoning is delayed but certain. The tales they used to defame you are beginning to unravel. People are asking questions. Why were they so intent on harming someone who remained silent? Why did they work so hard to dominate the narrative? And why, after all, are you still standing tall with peace and integrity? Because the truth did not need defending. This was being chronicled, and now those entries are becoming proof. A number. Your solitude was planned, not accidental. Your solitude was planned, not accidental. It did not simply happen. Your social circle was not rearranged at random by the cosmos. It was a long, planned process intended to deprive you of support, connection, and credibility. They did not just want you to feel alone. They intended you to be alone in every way, physically, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. Because a detached individual is simpler to undermine, quiet, and destroy. They knew they couldn't break you directly, so they attempted to keep you far enough away from everyone else that no one would hear you scream if they did. They utilized suggestions, subtle remarks, and phony concern to gradually push people away from you. Take care with them. I have heard some stuff. Something seems odd with them recently. They did not approach you with open hate. They arrived with a gentle effect. They instilled mistrust and let it do the rest. And this is the most agonizing part. Some of it worked. People you cared about become wary. People who formerly trusted you began to question what they believed they knew. Not because you changed, but because someone they believed said you had. This is how manipulation works. It does not need proof, just repetition. Just enough commotion to make quiet seem suspicious. They did not just want you secluded. They wanted you disassembled. They wanted you to sit in that silence. I'm wondering what you did wrong. Question your value and finally combust. That was the plan. Break your spirit by severing your relationships. Not by force, but via rust. Slow, quiet, and strategic. They didn't anticipate that seclusion would turn into activation. The isolation they created evolved into a hallowed area. In the absence of the throng, you discovered clarity. You remembered who you were. You rebuilt. And now the version of you they attempted to remove is more powerful than ever. Not because of them, but despite them. And those who formerly held back. They're beginning to notice the gaps in the plot. The stillness is becoming louder. The truth is emerging. And the light they imagined would go away in private is now too brilliant to ignore. They knew the truth would outlast the falsehoods. They just hoped you wouldn't. They understood that the truth would outlast the falsehoods. They just hoped you wouldn't. The smear campaign was never intended to last forever. They knew deep down that the truth would ultimately emerge, that the facts would be revealed. People would start to link the dots. But it was not the goal. Their intention was not to win the long game. It was to ensure that you would not survive the short one. They weren't banking on the truth being secret forever. They were merely wagering that you'd break before it caught up. That is the part that folks do not grasp. It wasn't about persuading the world forever. It was about depleting yourself emotionally, spiritually, and rationally until you gave up attempting to change the narrative. Until you stopped protecting yourself. Until you vanished. They wanted the untruth to outlast your power. They wanted it to spread quicker than your voice, infecting more people than your truth ever could. Because if they could force you to fold, they wouldn't have to deal with your true tale ever again. You were a threat, not because of your actions, but because of who you are. They needed to destroy your spirit. So the truth was never given a chance to breathe. So they pushed, twisted, and lied. They attacked your name, motivations, and integrity. And they did it with confidence because they knew one thing. You'd ultimately crumble beneath the weight of it, and the harm would be deeper than your resistance. But you did not break. You did not fold. You may have tripped, sobbed, gone silent, or questioned yourself. However, you did not vanish. You remained standing even as the untruth tightened around your reputation like a noose. And you're no longer gasping for oxygen. It's a lie. It's losing oxygen, power, and momentum. And when the smoke clears, something tremendous occurs. People are beginning to see the flaws in the tale. You are evidence that they did not have the number. They pinned your finale, but they never owned the pen. They pinned your finale, but they never owned the pen. They believed they had the power to choose how your tale would unfold. They anticipated that their smear campaign, falsehoods, and carefully built picture of who you were would be the last chapter. They wanted to be the narrators and editors, the ones who could declare, that's the end of them. But they forgot that true destiny does not respond to loud mouths. It responds to alignment. And no matter how many pages they attempted to shred from your life, they never had the ink. They closed the book on you prematurely, assuming you were done just because they stopped reading. They had their own version of the tale. The decline, failure, and exile. They made certain to distribute it far and wide. They wanted everyone to leave with the same sense that you were unstable, lost, and your light had gone out. However, while they were busy staging your funeral, life was silently altering the script. Because destiny does not publicize narrative twists, it just delivers them softly. And now here you are, still standing and rising, not shattered, but renewed. And it's upsetting them since you weren't meant to create it according to their perspective. You were meant to remain little, humiliated, and forgotten. However, your presence now contradicts their predictions, unraveling the whole false narrative. The beauty is that you did not have to yell. You did not have to battle for your reputation or plead for the truth to come out. You just continued living. And the truth, consistent, patient, and untouchable, it performed what it usually does. It waited, then spoke for itself. Now they're choked on the identical story they sought to feed everyone else. Because the more people see your success, the more clear it becomes. They never told the truth. They were writing fiction. In this new chapter, the falsehood is not revealed. It turns on the author, not by force or retribution, but by truth, which arrives with its own pen. They attempted to terminate your narrative, but they were not the author. And now they're trapped in the pages of a book they believe they authored. As you write the following chapter, free, strong, and unquestionably alive, they attempted to obliterate you with whispers, ruin you with falsehoods, and isolate you by intentional quiet. Not because you were incorrect, but because your presence exposed their deception. Your strength disrupted their sense of power. Your clarity was too obvious for their bewilderment to hide in. So they initiated a smear campaign to cover up their own cowardice, rather than to right a crime. But here is the reality. You never were who they said you were. And now the falsehood is crumbling under the weight of your survival. They portrayed you as deadly because your brightness highlighted their darkness. They labeled you unstable because your evolution made them uncomfortable. They played the victim because they couldn't afford to be seen as the villain. They scripted your ending. But the narrative belongs to God, and He never gave them the pen. And now here you are, not pleading to be believed, not struggling to be noticed, but being. That alone constitutes divine justice. Because your presence, pleasure, and power are the contradiction that ends their whole campaign. You did not clap back. You did not retaliate. You just outlived the lie. And the longer you survive, the more ridiculous the slander seems in retrospect. They sought to do more than simply be nasty. It was calculated. They forgot, however, that everything constructed on falsehood will eventually perish. And what is safeguarded by truth may bend and suffer, but it cannot shatter. So, let this be the last word. You're not returning to prove them incorrect. You're here to prove the truth, correct? Your narrative isn't about redemption. It is a revelation. You are proof that grace cannot be slain, that favor cannot be faked, and that's when falsehoods unravel. Truth does not shout. It glows. Allow the stillness to resound louder than the stain, and let your life complete the sentence they attempted to write. If this message moved you, if it made you feel seen, validated, or reminded of who you really are behind all the falsehoods they attempted to attach to your name, don't let it stop there. Subscribe to this channel, not only to keep informed, but also to stay connected to information that speaks your language, reflects your strengths, and reminds you that you are not alone on this road. I like this video. If it spoke to you, please leave a comment so that your voice may be heard. Your experience might be the validation someone else sorely needs. Most importantly, share this video with someone who has gone through a storm and has felt alienated, misunderstood, or misrepresented. Give them the gift of clarity. Healing does not always begin in quiet. Sometimes it begins with solidarity. This is more than just material. This is a confirmation. This is a community. This is the location where the selected, misjudged, quiet fighters, and misunderstood may finally be heard and seen. So, press the subscribe button and join the family. Your path is sacred. Your presence here. Divine timing. God bless you.